let's get started. Professor Robert George of Princeton and the James Madison Center there. And there are few people I know in academia who remind me as much as you do of my mentor at the University of Chicago, Leon Kass.
Oh, my
Um,
great
but
hero, my great hero.
just as he educated generations of University of Chicago students to think a little more deeply about fundamental questions in moral life and civic life, you have been doing the same at Princeton for many years. And you honored SAPIR by writing a really beautiful essay in our issue on chosenness, which to those in the audience who don't know this is actually a physical as well as a online publication, which we started almost 5 years ago to offer ideas for a thriving Jewish future, always with a view to soliciting essays from a wide and distinguished range of speakers. Your essay in this issue is An Unbreakable Covenant, which is a Catholic perspective on the question of chosenness. And it seems to me a particularly important essay now because questions that many of us thought, or views that many of us thought had been dispatched by Vatican II 60 years ago, seem to have found new life on the internet, on social media, dealing with the question of the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Jewish people. And one of the points that you made in your essay, which was so disturbing to read, was the extent to which on Catholic websites and in your own social media, you are encountering expressions of classic anti-Semitism that many of us thought had been laid to rest, especially among serious Catholics many years ago. Can you just describe what you are seeing and experiencing?
Well, yes, and Brett, first let me thank you for the opportunity to be on this podcast and also for the opportunity to publish my essay in SAPIR. That was really an honor. Also, let me thank you for the finest introduction I've ever gotten. I've been interviewed countless times, and usually the interviewer talks about my academic background and my degrees and all that stuff. But you compared me to my great hero, Leon Kass. I don't think I've ever had an honor greater than to be compared by one of Leon's own students to Leon. He is an amazing scholar and just a wonderful human being. Well, yes, Brett, many of us thought that the horrific monster of anti-Semitism, which has scarred just about every tradition there is, including the Christian tradition, anti-Semitism often appearing in the history of the church, even in the mouths and embodied in the actions of officials speaking for and acting for the church. Many of us thought we had finally killed and buried that vampire. But it turns out that we have not driven a stake through its heart because it's back. And it's back even among Catholics who should know better because there is a very well developed, established, unchangeable teaching of the church proclaimed at the Second Vatican Council, binding on all Catholics as a matter of their Catholic faith, that completely, unequivocally rejects anti-Semitism, rejects the idea that the Jewish people are an accursed people, rejects the once widely held belief, alas, among Christians, that Jews are corporately guilty of the murder of Jesus. All of these things proclaimed by the church, from the church's own point of view, definitively, are not up for legitimate debate within the church. These are settled matters. There is a firm, established, unchangeable teaching of the church. And yet, I see in my own social media comments boxes, when I reiterate, simply reiterate these now fixed teachings, I see anti-Semitic sentiments being hurled back at me. The same is true of other Catholic writers, including Catholic bishops, such as the Bishop Robert Barron. They encounter similar
Bishop Barrett is
anti
one of the most distinguished bishops in the United States today. Just
absolutely right, and he's probably the most prominent spokesman among the Catholic clergy for the Catholic faith in the public domain. If you want to know what Catholicism teaches or what the church is thinking these days, the best place to go is to Bishop Robert Barron, one of his broadcasts or podcasts. Yes, and to his very great credit, he takes it as part of his mission to proclaim the teaching of the church on the unbreakable covenant between God and the Jewish people, and the teaching of the church on the sinfulness of any form of anti-Semitism. This is absolutely out of bounds to Catholics. And Robert Barron, Bishop Barron, makes that absolutely clear, as I try to do in my own work. And yet he gets that same anti-Semitic feedback, including from some people who claim to be faithful Catholics. Well, you cannot be a faithful Catholic and be an anti-Semite. You cannot be a faithful Catholic and believe that God has abandoned the Jewish people, or that the Jewish people are no longer in a covenantal relationship with God. The church teaches definitively contrary to that nonsense. And so you just can't be a good Catholic and be an anti-Semite.
the idea that I think pervades some of the anti-Semitic currents, not just in among Catholics, but other religions, is the idea of supersessionism. The idea that in
Mhm.
effect, with Jesus or Muhammad, the covenant between God and the Jewish people was superseded by a new covenant. And one of the things I thought was fascinating about your essay is you referred readers to the fact that Pope Benedict, the late Pope Benedict, when he was already an emeritus pope, very near the end of his life, um, made the effort of writing an essay in a Catholic journal to rebut that idea. And just two points that I'd like to ask you about. Like, first, elaborate on Benedict's thinking, but if you have some insight into this is an interesting topic for an emeritus pope, knowing he's very near the end of his life, to dilate on in, I don't know if it was his last public writing, but certainly very near the last. Why was it so important for Benedict to make this point? And what exactly is Benedict arguing for and against?
Well, a pope, even an emeritus pope, has as his fundamental job confirming the faith of Catholics. That's making sure that Catholics actually understand what the church teaches, because they're supposed to believe what the church teaches. That's central to being a Catholic. So Benedict was obviously, Bret, concerned that many Catholics were being led astray into the belief that God had abandoned the Jewish people, into the ancient and now thoroughly rejected belief by the church that Israel has been completely superseded. It's sometimes, especially in Protestant Christian circles, called replacement theology, that once Jesus comes, some Jews, of course, accept Jesus as the Messiah, the promised Messiah to the Jewish people. Others don't. The Gentiles are brought into the church. It becomes now basically, sociologically, a Gentile religion. And therefore, the proponents of replacement theology or supersessionism believe God no longer has any kind of significant relationship with the Jewish people. The Jewish people are just left behind. Well, Benedict wanted to correct that misunderstanding. He wanted to reassert the unbroken and unbreakable covenant between God and the Jewish people. Now, this idea of supersessionism, Brett, goes back a very, very, very long way in Christianity. It goes all the way back, as I mentioned in my SAPIR essay, goes all the way back to an ancient heretic, a second century heretic, declared by the church to be a heretic, named Marcion. And what Marcion held was that now that Jesus has come, the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians have come to call the Old Testament, is no longer scripture. That the new scripture is what Christians call the New Testament, the Gospels and the letters of St. Paul and the other documents of the New Testament, and that Christianity therefore needs to reject its Jewish roots. And Benedict was saying, no, Marcionism should be condemned today, just as it was condemned all the way back then, that there is no fundamental break between the Old Testament and the New Testament, that the Hebrew scriptures are scripture. They're every bit as much part of the Christian Bible as the New Testament is. There's not a conflict between the New Testament and the Old Testament, or between the new covenant of God with the Christian people and the old covenant of God with the Jewish people. So Benedict is just trying to do his job as a pope or as an emeritus pope in making sure Catholics understand something where their understanding seems to be eroding or drifting away. We seem to be falling yet back again into an ancient falsehood.
Um, by the way, just for those listening in, at the bottom of your Zoom page, you'll see a Q&A function. And as questions occur to you for Professor George, just put them in that box, and I'll get to as many questions as I can in the last third of the hour that we have. A somewhat different theological question that I'm curious about, because you touched on it in the essay. The Vatican has repeatedly made the point that there is wisdom to be found in multiple faith and even non-faith traditions and ethical traditions. And that it is, in effect, I think the expression you used is kind of a reflected ray of light. That one that the Catholic Church can find a lot of common ground with Buddhists, Muslims, or agnostics who nonetheless are driven by a sense of ethics. The question I have is the relationship of the church with the Jews distinct from, say, the relationship with Muslims or other
Oh, yes.
great faith traditions?
Oh, yes. And the church herself at the Second Vatican Council, in the document Nostra Aetate, which is the document of the Second Vatican Council, the declaration on the church's understanding of and relationship with the non-Christian faiths, makes the point that there is something unique and special, standing apart, about the Jewish tradition from the Christian point of view. Judaism is obviously the mother religion of Christianity. There's no formal church document putting it this way, but I myself put it this way, and it's consistent with the church's teaching. Christianity is the other Jewish religion. Now, many Catholics don't understand the Jewish roots of their own religion, which means they don't really understand their own religion very well. But everything in Christianity derives from those Jewish roots. And Catholics would understand their religion much better if they understood that fact. Even the Catholic Mass, I don't know, Brett, whether you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, perhaps a
Oh,
funeral of a
many,
friend
many,
or
many.
something.
I grew up in Mexico City.
Oh, well,
I've
then
been to many
there you
Catholic Mass.
go. Well, right at the center of the Mass, you will recall, the congregation, along with the priest, proclaims, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are filled with your glory." What is that? Well, when my Jewish friends have been with me to Mass, they recognize it immediately. It's Kadosh, 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 the great Jewish prayer. Now, not one or two of 100 Christians attending a Mass would recognize that, would know that what they're doing is echoing here, saying, joining in this ancient Jewish prayer at the very heart of the Mass. In fact, you can't understand the Mass at all apart from some knowledge of Jewish temple worship from the period of the temple. And of course, most Catholics have no understanding of that either. So they don't, because they don't understand, they don't see the links that we as Catholics have with our Jewish brothers, or as Pope Benedict said, fathers in the faith. So there's a unique bond, there's a unique importance to the Jewish people from the Christian, certainly from the Catholic point of view. Now, as you point out, Nostra Aetate, the document, makes very clear that Catholics should embrace truth and wisdom wherever they can find it. If you find Where you find it in Buddhism, embrace it. If you find it in Hinduism, embrace it. If you find it in Islam, embrace it. If you find it in some secular tradition, if you find it in the novels of Camus, who was not himself a believer but wrestled with the great question, find and embrace it. The church, I'm going to quote here from the document, rejects nothing that is true and good and holy in any of these traditions. It rather wants to take it, whatever is true and good and holy, on board. But there is the special thing from a Christian point of view about the Jewish faith. It's not like any other. It is the root, to use the language of St. Paul, it is the root of the good olive tree on which the wild shoots of the Gentiles have been grafted. Those of us, like myself, who are Gentile Christians, we're the wild shoots grafted onto the good olive tree. What's the good olive tree? That's the Jewish people.
There's nonetheless, and you point this out in your essay, there is nonetheless, at least to the human mind, an irreconcilable tension between a covenantal people who are the recipients of God's unbroken covenant, the Jews, and the Christian claim to representing the whole truth of man's relationship to the divine. And one thing I'd like to ask you to grapple with a bit more is to say, well, I mean, the answer is God will be able to resolve this question for us at some point in the future. But is that simply how Christians have to leave it? Because it is an obvious difficulty with the argument that you have these two competing claims, which does help explain why supersessionism is a kind of a tempting thought to many sincere Catholic believers, because it's difficult to accept that the claims of the church, and at the same time have this allowance for this other tradition, which is simply at to one side of the Catholic Church. It sits apart.
Yeah, there is a tension there, and as I say in the piece, at the end of the day, we can only count it a mystery. It's not something we're going to be able to solve. We do know what the church teaches, that the covenant with the Jewish people, between God and the Jewish people, is unbroken and unbreakable, that the Jewish mission is not done. Especially that aspect of the Jewish mission proclaimed by the prophets, where the Jewish people are to be a light unto the Gentiles. All of that is on the one side. On the other side is this: the law of non-contradiction holds. So Jesus can't both be the Messiah promised to the Jewish people and not be the Messiah promised to the Jewish people. So if you have one side that says, no, he's not the Messiah, and the other side that says, yes, he is the Messiah, both sides can't be right. And obviously, Catholics are on the side that say, well, he is the Messiah. And Jews, at least those Jews who are not Christians, are on the side of saying, no, no, he's not the Messiah. Whatever else he is, he might be a great moral teacher. He might be a minor prophet. He might, be something, but he's not the Messiah. So both can't be true. Um, so we're stuck with that. I mean, a Catholic can't say, well, the Jewish faith, as practiced by contemporary Jewry, is right about everything, because it can't believe that the Jewish faith as practiced by contemporary Jewry is right on the question of whether Jesus is or isn't the Messiah. But what the church teaches is that irrespective of that matter, God's covenant with the Jewish people and the mission that he has given them remains in place and in force. The covenant is unbreakable. The mission continues. That special relationship that Christians have with their Jewish brothers slash fathers in the faith, fathers because you had it before the Catholics or Christians had it, remains the mission. That relationship remains what it always has been, even when it has been badly misunderstood.
I mean,
And I
what it
think
seems
that's
to me,
really, Brett, all you can, I mean, at least that's all I've been able to say. And judging from the church's own documents, that's all the church can say. What God's plan is, how this all ends, how it eventuates, what becomes of it all in the end, we don't know. It'll probably be a surprise to people on both sides of the divide. But there it
it,
is.
it, se- it seems that what you're describing is actually an invitation to a certain kind of healthy intellectual humility, to say there are questions that we can't uh, satisfactorily answer, and in the meantime, until we can, in 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 years hence, we are going. This is how we propose to table the resolution,
I think that's
and in
exactly right. Yeah, if I could just interrupt, I do think that's exactly right. And I think the message for Christians, especially for Catholics on whom this teaching as Catholic teaching is binding, is that you must never suppose that living Judaism is of no theological significance, or that the Jewish faith is not valid or relevant from God's point of view, or worthless, or not meaningful. That the Catholics can affirm and should affirm Jewish faith. We should be grateful for the faith of our Jewish brothers and sisters. This is pleasing to God.
Let me ask you a more contemporary question. Some of us were disappointed, I think is the word, to see towards the end of his life Pope Francis praying to a Jesus who had been uh, a creche, I guess. I think it was a creche with the baby Jesus wrapped in a Palestinian keffiyeh. And leaving aside how that came about, my real interest is whether you see contemporary views on the state of Israel shaping, uh, or maybe the word is infecting, uh, Catholic views about Judaism theologically speaking. I mean, are the controversies over Israel and the perception that that this is a tale of essentially Jewish perfidy against a defenseless underdog opponent in the Palestinians. Do you have a sense that that is kind of shaping Catholic thinking about these very issues, or is it to one side?
No, I think it's having a very unfortunate effect, and I think it's part of, it's not the whole of, it's probably not even a large part of, but it is a part of, a not insignificant part of the rise of a revival of anti-Semitism, especially among Christians. And it's very, very, very regrettable. And, Pope Francis was incautious in many of the things he did, I regret to say, and I think that was a very ill-advised move, not because, the Pope shouldn't condemn the equal dignity of Palestinians and Jews and Christians and everybody else. It's central to Catholic teaching. It's central to Jewish teaching that each and every human being, irrespective of ethnicity or race or religion, is the bearer of profound, inherent, and equal dignity, is made in the very image and likeness of God. So that's good. The Pope should be proclaiming that. But if you wrap an infant Jesus in the keffiyeh, that's not going to be interpreted as a statement affirming the equal dignity of Palestinian people and everybody else. That's going to be interpreted as a political statement about the rights and wrongs and justices and injustices of the competing sides in the Middle East. And, it seems to me that Pope Francis and his advisors should have seen that. And if they didn't want to make a political statement, and they shouldn't have wanted to make a political statement, they shouldn't have done it that way. It's more than fine for a pope to stand up and say, let us remember that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, and that the life of a child is of equal and infinite value, whether that child is Polish, Iranian, Chinese, Palestinian, Israeli, Ghanan, no matter what it is. That's fine. And that's good. And we need that reminder because so often we human beings somehow lose our grip on the humanity of people who are different from us racially or ethnically and so forth. That's the record of human history. But you've got to be careful with this symbolism. And the Pope was very incautious and I think ill-advised in participating in that particular exercise.
I'm wondering if you have insight into the mind of another Robbie, Rob Prevost, now better known as Pope Leo the 14th. Um, he has said a few things on the subject, but do you have a sense of where he will or is likely to lead the church on these questions, and not just theologically, but also to the extent that the Pope is a political actor politically?
Yeah. I don't yet have, I don't think anyone does, apart from those who may know him personally, and I do not. I don't think anybody, and I certainly don't, have a very good grip on where he is, theologically, politically, or otherwise. His background is a fairly quiet one. He's been an important player within the church, especially in his role under the pontificate of Francis in identifying and assisting in the appointment of bishops around the world. But he hasn't been outspoken. He's not like John Paul II, a professor, or Benedict XVI, a professor who writes books and writes articles and is out there with a big public profile. Most of us had never heard of him. I'd barely heard of him. And most people, I think, hadn't heard of him, including most Catholics, hadn't heard of him at all before he ascended to the chair of St. Peter. I do like the things he has said. And I quote one of them in the piece, as you'll recall, Brett, on the importance of recognizing the teaching of the Catholic Church on its understanding and relationship with and appreciation of the Jewish faith. That's all very good. Um, I I hope he will be cautious. I've seen one or two instances where I thought he wasn't being too cautious on statements about the Middle East, on these political statements. I think the fewer political statements popes make generally, the better. Sometimes there's no avoiding political statements because they implicate moral questions that the church has to teach on. But especially in cases where there's conflicts in understanding the facts on the ground, and there are different reasonable prudential judgments that have to be made, and you can't simply resolve questions by appeal to moral principles. in those areas, I think church officials really do the church and the world best, do serve us best by not speaking. Now, where there's a direct link to a moral principle and where the facts are indisputed and where prudential type judgments aren't crucial to resolving the question, well, then yes, the church needs to speak on those things. But it's a fraught area, and I think it's really important to be careful. One thing I think, gosh, Brett, Pope should not be doing is having impromptu press conferences and just answering questions spontaneously. Pope Francis did this all the time. He'd walk to the back of the airplane and meet with the press corps and talk extemporaneously in response to their questions. And then very often the Vatican press office would have to clean up the answers once the plane landed and people began trying to figure out, well, exactly what the Pope is saying here. I don't know. Have I answered your question?
I think you have. I want to actually depart a little bit. I'm going to turn in a moment to the questions from our audience, but I can't help myself. I want to pick your mind a little bit, pick your brain a little bit on the climate at Princeton, and particularly you. I actually mentioned you in an essay of mine in SAPIR a couple of issues back, referring to the little ghettos of conservative or classically liberal thought at American universities. But in your experience now at Princeton, particularly maybe the last few years, do you see, well, I guess two questions. Do you feel that the anti-Israel protests have rubbed off into a general climate of hostility on the campuses? And do conservative-minded students, both in terms of their political orientation and maybe their ethical or religious convictions, do they feel more confident or more besieged or isolated on campus? I know this is anecdotal, but I'm just curious to get your sense of kind of the mood on, one of America's most distinguished universities.
Yeah, I think Princeton is quite different in some ways from urban universities like Columbia and Harvard and some others, perhaps University of Chicago and others. Um, Let me tell you what the situation is like here. Uh, there is a significant element of the campus, both among students and faculty, who are hostile to Israel, who believe in the rhetoric of the river to the sea, who don't want a Jewish presence in the Middle East, reject the legitimacy of the state of Israel altogether, would like that area of the world to be what was that dreadful German phrase, Judenrein.
Judenrein.
Judenrein, yeah, free of Jews. Uh, yeah, I mean, we've got it here. That's an element. It's nowhere approaching majority, Brett. Now, it's not also not insignificant. It's not negligible. It's significant, um, but it's not pervasive. It's not the view of the typical. If you just grab a Princeton student off the street, the odds are he's not going to have those attitudes toward Israel. Um, he'll probably fully recognize the right of Israel to exist and to defend itself. He or she might be critical of the Netanyahu government or of the war policies or believe that Israel struck back with disproportionate force after October 7th and so forth. I think that would be the typical response. And then, of course, we have strong defenders of Israel as well. We did have what were they encampment? We had an encampment, although our administration forbade them from actually staying overnight. We did have the occupation of a building. I believe 3 faculty members and something like 16 or 17 students participated in that occupation. We did more recently, just a few months ago, have a terrible incident when an Israeli Jewish politician was speaking on campus, and his event was disrupted and couldn't continue. He was shouted down, chaos, and the event had to be terminated. That's an embarrassment to my university that such a thing would happen here. We have endorsed, Brett, the University of Chicago free speech principles. So stuff like that's not supposed to happen. And unfortunately, I don't think that it was handled in the best possible way. If it were handled in the best possible way, those demonstrators would have been removed by security, and the event would have gone forward. Unfortunately, the event didn't go didn't go forward.
This is a
But
good segue. Sorry, this is a good segue for one of the questions from people listening in. And this is from a former student of yours, Liam Glass. Building on the Princeton climate question, Liam asks, how have class discussions changed since October 7th? Do you still find liberal students hungry to be challenged by you? Much like you changed my perspective on a variety of issues, how does Israel come up in con law, constitutional law?
well, it doesn't come up in my, at least it hasn't yet come up in my constitutional law class. We just haven't been addressing questions of American constitutional law that would be pertinent to the question of Israel and Palestine. But I have engaged in many discussions with my students, and I find them intellectually curious, willing to be challenged, not dogmatic. Now, Brett, I have to add, although I get a very wide swath, my courses are heavily enrolled, so I have large numbers of students, and I get a large swath of liberal as well as conservative students. I think it's fair to say that students on the hard left, the most woke students, just don't take my classes. They're not interested in me. Or if they're interested in me, it's in a very hostile way. They don't want. They know I have a reputation for challenging people's beliefs, no matter what they are, even if they're conservative, even if their beliefs I share, I challenge them. So the kind of hard left students don't take my classes, but I get a pretty broad representation of conservative and liberal. And by liberal here, I don't mean just classical. I mean Obama voting, Hillary Clinton voting liberals. Real liberals, but not crazies. And they're open. They're just as my former student here can recall. They're open to being challenged. So we're good.
Well, woke students don't need to take your class because they know everything. So there's no need.
Yeah, that's right. When you're infallible, what's the need for teaching, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I should
Let me
add,
let me turn.
we do have a strong pro-Israel element here. I mean, it's nowhere near a majority, but it is here. We're also blessed to have two Jewish chaplaincies on campus, which I think provide excellent support for our Jewish students who have felt, probably not as badly as students at Columbia and some other places, but have felt somewhat embattled. We have the Center for Jewish Life, which is our historic Jewish chaplaincy, and we have a very active kabod led by a wonderful rabbi who's been here now many, many years, a very dear friend of mine, Rabbi Eitan Webb. So I feel our Jewish students are being supported. Also, I was very pleased and proud of this. On October 8th, our Catholic chaplaincy immediately sent to the Jewish chaplaincies strong words of encouragement and support and solidarity. And those relationships, the relationships, especially between the Catholic and Jewish chaplaincies, are very good.
The daughter of my rabbi is actually now a sophomore at Princeton, and she invited me to come speak uh, back in April, I think. And I was really delighted by the respectfulness and intelligence of the exchanges I had with students and faculty members. I kind of came wondering whether it was going to be an angry show, and it was really a great credit to at least the students who came to my talk to
I'm
engage the
delighted.
way they.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that, Brett, but I'm not surprised. At the risk of my claiming some credit for my program for the atmosphere here. I do think that it makes a difference at a university to have a large unit of the academic unit of the university, like the James Madison program at Princeton, which regularly exposes the campus to conservative or classically liberal ideas or ideas that are critical of the dominant liberal or left-wing or woke orthodoxies on campus. I think in a lot of places, any idea that counts as conservative or counts as outside the liberal orthodoxy or the left-wing orthodoxy, when those ideas are spoken, let's say by a visiting speaker like yourself, it's a shock, and people are startled by it and offended by it and assaulted, they would say. They feel like it's a personal assault. And that's because those ideas are just never heard. But our situation is different because of the Madison program and it's being so large and influential on campus. Our students hear these ideas all the time. They may or may not like them, but they hear pro-Israel ideas. They hear economically, socially, culturally conservative ideas all the time. So it's not a shock. If somebody like you comes in or somebody else comes in, it's not a shock. They can challenge, they don't have to agree, but they don't feel like, my gosh, we're being invaded by the Mongol horde.
Um, Ann Carney has a question. It's this: has the teaching function of the church failed to make clear the message of Nostra Aetate? Who is responsible for this failure, if it is indeed a failure?
Well, I don't think there's anything unique about Nostra Aetate here. I very much regret to say that Catholics today are a very poorly catechized religious community. Um, Catholicism for far too many Catholics has become kind of like a tribe or a cultural identity or a social community, even for mass attending Catholics. The church, and not just with respect to this teaching, just it's theological doctrines, it's moral teachings. Many Catholics just never hear them taught in church. I don't know if the clergy and the episcopate just think that we somehow know them, but unless you're taught, unless they're preached, a lot of people are not gonna know them. And that's certainly true in this area. I mean, I mentioned earlier, I mean, most Catholics don't really understand the Mass because they don't understand the rootedness of the Catholic faith in the Jewish tradition. So there are all parts of the Mass that they don't get. So we just have to do better. And I hope that what Catholics call catechesis, the teachings of the doctrines of the faith, will be improved, if not under this pontificate, sometime soon, because we desperately need it in the Catholic Church.
Well, if it's any consolation, the Jews have similar problems. So
I know, yeah,
it's not
yeah.
a phenomenon unique to Catholicism. Um, I'm sorry this is an anonymous attendee because it's a really good question, and I think it might tickle your fancy. Should Jewish students consider attending Catholic universities? What is the climate like at Catholic universities compared to other universities in terms of anti-Semitism? Any sense of that?
Okay, now, Brett, your participants here need to know there are Catholic universities and there are Catholic universities.
Yeah.
They're not monolithic. Many Catholic universities have essentially secularized. They are Catholic in the way that Princeton is Presbyterian,
You mean like
or
Georgetown, for instance?
like Georgetown,
Yeah.
for instance, to a very considerable degree. And it gives me no pleasure to say that. And there are a lot of great things about Georgetown, but I'm afraid it has drifted to at least my very strong impression from my visits there as a speaker and in other ways is that it's drifted from its religious identity and become more secular. And then there are others, University of Dallas, St. Thomas Aquinas College, Wyoming Catholic, Franciscan University of Steubenville, that are more authentically Catholic. And at those institutions, maybe it's because they are not only Catholic institutions, but Catholic academic institutions, there is a much greater awareness of Catholic teaching more generally in the doctrinal area, in the moral area, in this area. And so you will find on those campuses very welcoming attitudes toward Jews and Judaism, and very welcoming attitudes toward Jewish students and Jewish visitors and Jewish speakers on campus. A man like Leon Kass is worshipped at Franciscan University of Steubenville or um, uh, University of Dallas. Uh, Leon, I think your participants know, is a very distinguished Jewish scholar. He's a hero at places like that. He once said to me he sometimes thinks that his biggest fan base is at Notre Dame. Uh, and that
But where does Notre Dame rank in terms of still Catholic or not so Catholic?
mixed, okay? And it could go in either direction. It's at what people call an inflection point. Now, some units of the university are very Catholic, and these would be the ones that are also the most pro-Jewish. For example, the law school. The faculty of the law school is Catholic, it's conservative, and it's pro-Jewish, and would be very much on board and actually knows about and understands Nostra Aetate. Franciscan University of
But
Steubenville,
you're
to be
making an interesting point that I just want to just make sure I'm hearing this right. What you're saying is the more Catholic the university, the more welcoming it is to Jews.
no
It's
question about it.
as these schools have drifted into a kind of I don't know if secularism, but a secularized Christianity, that you find much more hostility.
No question about it.
The
What would be more like Columbia, for example? What would
Yeah,
be more like Columbia? Would it be Franciscan University of Steubenville or would it be Georgetown? And the question answers itself. Yeah. I wanted to point out that after October 7th, you remember I was shocked, you were probably shocked, that the reaction, instead of sympathy for Israel, very quickly degenerated into hostility and anti-Semitism. And that was a point at which Jewish students at a lot of elite universities were feeling especially embattled. Do you remember this?
I do,
Yeah, you do? Okay.
vividly.
The president of Franciscan University of Steubenville, one of the most Catholic and conservative universities in the country, put out a public statement, which is there on the internet for everyone to read, um, about the solidarity of his university with the Jewish people at this moment, his disgust at the emergence of this hostility to Jews and Judaism on campus, and an invitation for any student at any university in the country, any Jewish student who was feeling unwelcome or feeling threatened in any way at their home university would be welcome. No questions asked, no admissions process or anything like that. Just come to the University of Steubenville and stay as long as you like to get your credits and continue your education. That was a wonderful thing for the president of that university to do.
Someone, forgive me if I mangle your name, but Chong Win um, uh, asks, and I'm sorry if I got the pronunciation wrong, but Chong Win asks this question: what should Catholics think about the Israel-Gaza conflict?
Okay, so the Catholic Church does not take a position on the question of whether um, the state of Israel should be a Jewish state or should be a state like the one that Martin Buber had in mind, a state where Jews and Arabs live together with the state being neither one nor the other or anything like that. Now, individual popes have had positions on the question. For example, John Paul II made clear that he believed in, he favored a Jewish state. But he didn't claim that Catholic doctrine requires that belief. He did claim Catholic doctrine requires the rejection of anti-Semitism. Catholic doctrine requires the belief that the covenant with the Jews is broken, God's covenant with the Jewish people is unbroken and unbreakable. Those are theological matters. He was giving his personal opinion, his personal political opinion about the nature of the state of Israel and its rights and so forth. And I think that's where the issue is left as far as Catholic teaching is concerned. So, strictly speaking, so long as you don't degenerate into anti-Semitism. You can be opposed to Zionism, although you're certainly not required to be. It's not required as a matter of Catholic doctrine that you believe that the state established in 1948 as a Jewish state should be and should continue to be a Jewish state. I want to make sure that I was clear. Did you understand what I'm saying there?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
Um, this is a Princeton question, but I'm guessing that there are a fair number of Princetonians on this call, and so they'll be interested in this. This is someone named Carrie Loreno, who's a Princeton alumna. She says that there's an event coming up on October 30th with a speaker. Carrie says, who is funded by individuals and organizations with direct ties, who plans to discuss the justification for October 7th. Princeton, she adds, continues to not enforce their own free speech policies. Many examples there. This is one, and she links to this. Carrie, forgive me, I don't have time to really look at the link, but I want to ask a broader question of Professor George, which is that as you've devoted yourself to defending the principles of the American founding, including the principles in the First Amendment as they and the spirit of the First Amendment as it applies even at a private university like Princeton. I guess what I would say to Carrie's question or add to Carrie's point is, how does a thoughtful constitutional originalist who believes in the importance of both the letter of the First Amendment and the spirit of open inquiry and robust disagreement approach a question like the invitation of speakers to a private university offering views that are morally shocking, genuinely abhorrent? What do you, I'm sure this is a question you've wrestled with in your classroom.
Yes.
How should a thoughtful person, how should a thoughtful Princeton alum think about this?
Well, I strongly believe in free speech. As a constitutional principle, it's vital to the maintenance of a democratic republic. And in universities, it's absolutely critical, indispensable to the truth-seeking mission of the university. Unless we have truly, truly robust, very nearly absolute free speech, we cannot prosecute our mission of trying to advance human understanding, knowledge, seek wisdom. And that means you're going to have to put up with a lot of really outrageous stuff, a lot of outrageous speech. I want any idea that anybody is prepared to defend giving reasons, arguments, and evidence to be on the table. That's the currency of intellectual discourse, Brett, as far as I'm concerned. Just as there's an economic currency, it's pounds and pence in Britain, it's dollars and cents in the United States. So there's a currency of intellectual discourse. Reasons, arguments, and evidence. And I think we can legitimately demand that people do business in that currency if you're going to be at a university. But I wouldn't want to say that there are points of view that cannot be advanced, even if someone's willing to advance them, however disgusting I might consider them to be, with reasons, arguments, and evidence. And so, for example, I cannot imagine how anybody could conceivably think that the murders, the rapes, the kidnappings of October 7th, these attacks on innocent people, could be justified. It's just unimaginable to me. I don't know how that argument would even go. On the other hand, if somebody's willing to come here and make the argument, and there's an institution on campus willing to host that person, I'm not going to ask the president of the university to cancel that speech. I'm going to respect that unit's right and that speaker's right to freedom of speech. Now, I think that person should be challenged. I think that person should be subjected to that person's arguments should be subjected to critical scrutiny. I wouldn't disrupt. I'll tell you the truth, I'm not even into protesting. I don't protest speakers. I try to engage speakers. I'll give you a very good example. For more than 25 years, I've been the colleague and friend of Peter Singer. Now, if any of your participants know anything about Peter Singer, he is as far from me and from Leon Kass on issues of bioethics, including the sanctity of human life, as anyone could conceivably be. He argues not only for the legitimacy of abortion through the entire 9 months, he argues for infanticide. He famously published or for the morality of infanticide. He famously published an article in The Spectator saying that parents of newborn children should have 28 days to decide whether they want to keep the kid. Even if it's a perfectly healthy newborn baby, they should have 28 days in which they can legitimately order the kid to be killed. Now, there couldn't be somebody with a view more distant from mine than that. And yet, when people on the conservative side, my fellow conservatives, have argued that Peter Singer should be fired for having that view or shouldn't be allowed to be hired for having that view, I've always defended his free speech. And that's
My
because
observation,
I think the
go ahead.
learning process requires that we engage with someone, even if his views are radical and, from my point of view, deeply unjust, if he's willing to do business in that proper currency, which Peter is. And as a result of that, and engaging with him, even though I've not changed his mind and he's not changed my mind, I've actually deepened my understanding. I hope he would say the same about me and his engagement with me. I've deepened my understanding of the issues. I've encouraged my students to take his classes, Brett. And to his credit, he's encouraged his students to take my classes. I think there's much to be gained even when you got a person whose views are so, again, from my point of view, profoundly immoral as those views.
My uh this is a personal observation, but my sense of those relationships is that it's usually the conservative who is more sincerely tolerant of the views of progressive views they find abhorrent on their merits than progressives are tolerant, personally tolerant of conservative ideas. Uh, uh, and I wish it weren't so, but there's a lot of room, I think, in the conservative mind for for dialogue across radical differences. There's, generally speaking, much less in the other direction, and I sometimes wonder whether I'm not being humored in some of those relationships when I'm trying to extend myself to think charitably of other points of view, and it's not reciprocated. Um, we are very near the end of our time, Robbie, and I just want to say once again how delighted and honored we were to have you in this issue. It was an issue that was, I mean, filled with, I think, a really exceptional set of authors and a very diverse set of authors. Howard Jacobson, one of the great
Yeah.
novelists writing in the English language today, had our lead-off essay. Michael Oren, one of my
Yeah.
personal heroes as a diplomat and a historian, a beautiful essay from Kian Taj Bash from an Iranian dissident about his reflections on Chosenness in a Tehran prison cell. Um, an absolutely stunning essay from Ari Lam on the
Oh, the rabbi.
resurrection of
Yeah.
Chosenness in post-Tudor or Tudor England and post-Tudor England in the 17th and 18th centuries. Uh, and Allegra Goodman on Chaim Potok's novel, The Chosen. And yours is just simply a splendid essay. And what we're trying to do in this journal of ours is get our readers at the highest level to think about questions that matter to the Jews, but not only to the Jews. And I really want to thank you for your time this afternoon and for your contribution to this issue. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you, Brett, and thank you for all the work you do at SAPIR and beyond. It's really been an honor to be able to contribute a little to that work.
Thanks so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Bye bye now.